All right, week 13, we're going to get into college football playoff predictions, and we're going to start by looking at the AP poll for this week. And I have some problems with it. Notre Dame, number 6, way too high, super inflated, and honestly, Penn State and Indiana are too. I do believe that this Bama team, the Georgia team, the Ole Miss team, maybe even the Tennessee team are better than those three teams. However, the two losses for those SEC teams do get in the way, but I think it'll get sorted out come the conference championships. But some other problems: BYU under SMU, despite BYU beating them. I don't understand that. The head-to-heads don't matter, I guess. The body of work does. But I think BYU is still a pretty good team, despite the loss against an underrated Kansas team. Don't understand that. I think BYU is still in the conversation for the Big 12. I love Colorado, though. I'm a big fan. So moving on, we're going to get into my actual predictions. And what you'll see here is let's go here. What you're going to see is my predictions. Here we go. So shout out to Playoff Predictors. And this is my end of season bracketology. And I'll go through all my rankings. And for me, I'm really thinking about the entire body of work. I'm not thinking about, a team was ranked 6, but then you got to drop them to 11 in the case of Notre Dame. I'm really looking at the entire body of work. So let's start with Boise State at 12. Boise State, I think it's going to be the best group of 5 team. I do think Army will lose to Notre Dame. And then I think they're going to lose to Tulane too in the American Conference Championship. So Tulane is going to be Boise State's biggest competition. They just don't have that win. And Boise State has a quality loss, a close loss against the best team in the country. I think they are a little underrated. I think they're a really good team. I think they're going to give Ohio State a run for their money. Moving on to 11, Notre Dame. That loss is going to hinder them in my eyes. They do beat good teams. Like Texas A&M, they just beat Virginia. I think they will beat Army. I think that USC game is going to be a lot closer than people expect, and it's going to drop them down a few based on what I have going on. So Notre Dame I have at 11. At 10, Indiana, they're going to suffer a decent loss to Ohio State. I think it'll be 14-point loss, 10 to 14-point loss. Not something that you're going to say is close. I think Ohio State will definitely prove that they are the better team. It wasn't just home field advantage. So I have them at 10. They're going to beat Purdue the next week, and they're going to finish with 1 loss. But I just don't think that they're going to be better than any of these SEC teams that I have ranked ahead of them. Moving on to 8 and 9, I have Penn State at 8, Ole Miss at 9. These two teams are the same to me. They're teams that have fallen short in the past with pretty good squads, and they're going to face off, and one of them is going to get to the quarterfinals. And I have Penn State at home. That'll be big for them, although I do think they are overinflated. They are an overranked team. And Ole Miss has a big win against Georgia at home, and that cannot be understated. They have one of the marquee wins on the year. This is going to be a tough game. It's going to be a grinded out game. Jackson Dart is the real deal. I'm a big fan of his, but this Penn State team just wins those ugly games. So I'll get back to that, but that's going to be a brutal game for both those teams. At 7, we have Texas, and this is saying that Texas beat Texas A&M, got to the SEC championship, but then lost to Alabama. And in this case, I have Georgia ranked ahead of them on the head-to-head. This Texas team does have that marquee win, but they're a 2-loss team now. And I just don't think I think you got to value the head-to-head for Georgia there, despite their 2 losses being against 2 high-quality teams. At 6, kind of just explained it. Georgia, I do think Georgia is dangerous. Is dangerous come college football playoff season. I think they're going to finish strong with this win against Tennessee this past week. They got some easy games in UMass and Georgia Tech team, which beat Miami. I think they're going to crush Georgia Tech, and if that tells you anything about this next round for them. So I got Georgia at 6. At 5, this is assuming that Ohio State does make the Big Ten championship, ultimately loses another close one to Oregon. I have them at 5. I think pretty fair to have that. I don't want to punish them too much. They lost to the best team in the country twice by close margin. Almost a coin flip in that game. Moving on to the buys, you got Colorado, who I have winning the Big 12. I think they're going to have probably Boise State, Colorado, Miami, 10, 11, 12 in the CFP rankings, possibly, even 11, 12, and 13, and Tennessee stays at 10 and they just get bounced out. So I think it'll be really interesting how they finish out these rankings. But I do have Colorado being the fourth highest conference championship winner. I have them beating Arizona State after Arizona State beats BYU this week. Moving on to Miami, they're going to be beating SMU in the ACC championship. I'm really not that high on SMU. I'm not high on Miami, but Miami has more talent than SMU, and I think they're going to beat them pretty well in the conference championship. And then we got Bama and Oregon at 1 and 2. Pretty self-explanatory. They both get marquee wins against Ohio State, and then Bama with Texas. I think Bama is going to prove themselves as the dominant force in the SEC this year. And there's not much more to explain for them. That big win against LSU, they're going to finish with a win against Texas, and I think they're going to be the second best team in the country. So moving on to the actual games. We'll start with Boise State at Ohio State, and the home field advantage for these teams cannot be understated. This Boise State team has not played against Ohio State in away from home. Now, just imagine if Boise State was hosting a college football playoff game. That would be great on the blue turf. But Ohio State's going to handle Boise State. As much as Genty can get them, against Mountain West teams, I think this Ohio State team, too well balanced, too much talent. They're going to beat Boise State pretty well. Moving on to Ole Miss, Penn State. This is going to be a battle, like I said. Ole Miss has some flash and some big wins that Penn State just does not have this year. I can see Ole Miss beating this game at a neutral site. However, they got to travel up in the cold mid-December to Beaver Stadium. That's a tough task in a crowd that hasn't experienced a college football playoff game. I think Penn State's going to be ready, and I think James Franklin is going to want this marquee win. I do believe that they get the win at home and go on to verse the number one team in the country in Oregon. This Notre Dame team is a fraud. They're fraudulent. I don't think they're good. I think in week 1, you really can beat anybody. If your team comes out ready to play, you can beat anybody. And you see that. They beat Texas A&M. It was a great win. Texas A&M, went on to beat some good teams. However, Notre Dame I just don't like them. I think they're fake. That Northern Illinois loss is one of the most embarrassing losses I've seen from a team. I can't believe that they've been ranked this high. I can't believe that a team that lost to Northern Illinois is ranked 6th right now in the AP poll. Georgia is 10 times better than them. This is going to be a demolishing of Notre Dame in Athens. Indiana versus Texas. Now, this is a really interesting game because I think Indiana is going to, have some nerves going into Ohio State. They're going to, they're undefeated. They have a lot on the line. I think come this game, though, you're just going to put your heart out. Doesn't matter what you're ranked anymore. You're in. Just win. And this Texas team coming off a loss against Bama, there's been some doubt about if they're, as good as people say. I think that doubt will be proven right in this game. I have Indiana going on the road, being the only road team to win one of these 4 games and beat Texas, send Quinn Ewers packing. The Cinderella story continues, and Indiana gets that huge win and really solidifies this being probably the best season of football in their history. So now moving on to the quarterfinals, these neutral site games. Colorado gets a college football playoff games with the Sanders. It's absolute cinema. but it will be only for one game. Ohio State is just too well balanced, and I have concerns about Ohio State's offensive front, but it's not going to matter. It's going to be a shootout, and Colorado's defense is just not going to keep up with the star power in Ohio State's offense. Penn State, Oregon. This is another opportunity for Penn State to get a huge win and to prove, they are a top 8 team in college football or a top 4 team in college football. And I just don't see it happening. This Oregon team is just super talented. To go undefeated in an environment such as this year with, these SEC teams losing some games against teams that haven't been competitive, and to get that win over Ohio State earlier in the year, I just don't see this Penn State team being that competitive with Oregon. I got them winning pretty easily in this one. Georgia, Miami. Miami has, gotten by some Cam Ward heroics against teams a lot worse than Georgia. I don't see Georgia letting it stand. I think Georgia wins pretty handedly against a Miami team that is overranked, shouldn't have had a bye. And they really honestly could be a 3 to 4 loss team if some dicey calls don't go their way, including a loss to Cal and Virginia Tech. So I think Georgia really handles Miami and gives it to them. It could be a 35-13 sort of game, and it's over by the midway point of the second quarter. Indiana versus Bama. Unfortunately, I think Indiana's luck runs out against a really talented Bama team coming off of an SEC championship and probably has all the confidence in the world. And, this Indiana team, they get that marquee win, and sometimes after the fact, there's a regression into reality of, you are Indiana and you're going against Alabama. But I think it'll do wonders for the program this year, and I think they will be one of the more talented Big Ten teams in the next 10 years. So congrats to them, and congrats to that coach for that turnaround. But Bama's going to take this game, and I actually really don't think any of these quarterfinals games are going to be competitive. I think the closest one will probably be Ohio State, Colorado. I think all these other ones will be blowouts. So moving on, and now we get to some really interesting games, semifinal games, Ohio State, Oregon, and Georgia, Alabama, 2 rematches. And it's going to be some great football here, and it's going to be the culmination of a long season for both these teams, for all 4 of these teams, to win this game against a conference opponent and to really go to a national championship with the 2 best teams. And I think this is exactly what the committee would have wanted. It's exactly what college football wanted. So getting into these games, Ohio State, Oregon, I have Ohio State finally beating Oregon. I think it's really hard to beat a team 3 times. It's never been done. I don't think a team's versed each other 3 times before in one season. I don't think Oregon can beat this Ohio State team 3 straight times with how much talent is on that team. I think Ohio State figures something out in those 2 games, which honestly are kind of get-right games after losing the Big Ten championship. You're going to be double-digit favorites probably in both those games. So it allows you some breathing room. It allows you to figure some stuff out coming into this one. Oregon, I think they're just, it's just tough position for them. I think if it's any other of these teams, I'm picking Oregon, but Ohio State, 3rd time, I don't see it. Ohio State wins. Moving on, Georgia, Alabama, similar situation with Bama winning against Georgia earlier this year. However, I'm actually going to go the opposite way with this one. I think Georgia, really good team, but Bama with that SEC championship, the confidence of beating Texas. I think Georgia wastes some of its offense in Miami. In that Miami game, give me Alabama. And then we got Ohio State, Alabama national championship. These are the 2 best teams in the country. And it's going to come down to the wire. I think this is an even matchup. 2 teams that have been tested this year. Ohio State finally gets over the hurdle of Oregon that kind of stood in their way this season. They get over it. Bama, goes on, beats Georgia, big rivalry. They're coming on with confidence after beating them twice this year. But I'm going to go with Bama winning the championship. And it really comes down to Ohio State's offensive line. There's a lot of questions there. There's been a lot of questions there throughout the season with the injuries. The first 2 games, I don't think you see it show up. Against Oregon, it just kind of that 3 times rule of where I just think Ohio State would win one of those 3. But it does show up against Alabama in a really talented defense in a rowdy national championship environment. I think Bama wins, and I think they take the cake. So let me know, do I get it right? I think this is a pretty safe prediction, honestly. I think a more crazy, chaotic prediction would have Notre Dame losing one of these last 2 games and falling out, Indiana beating Ohio State possibly this week, and then Ole Miss possibly losing, or Penn State possibly losing this week against Minnesota and Florida, respectively. So let me know what you think. Let me know your predictions in the comments. And thanks for watching. We'll be back with some more soon.